Hello, everyone. Thank you very much for being here for this session. The enemy of my enemy is my friend. Today, we will be talking about how authoritarian regimes do censorship, but at the same time, in places as different as Iraq and Venezuela, Belarus, China, Russia, we want to find what are the similarities, what are the commonalities between these regimes. We want to also know their foreign policy, specifically how they exchange information on ways that they can circumvent diplomacy, the ways they circumvent US sanctions, for instance, which I think is really interesting so we can make foreign policy that is effective at bringing democracy and freedom to all these places. My name is Jorge Jraissati. I am from Venezuela, and I have great people here with me from different places, as China, Iraq, also Venezuela. So please, we'll begin with Faisal, who will be speaking about his experience in Iraq. And he also wants to point out about the recent events in Afghanistan, events that should worry all of us, because after 20 years, then the Taliban are in power again. So we need to see what are the lessons that we can actually bring from this experience. Military lessons, political lessons, and specifically diplomatic lessons. So thank you very much, and please, you can go ahead.
Hello, everyone. Good to see you all. My name is Faisal, originally from Iraq. My work is focused on making censored book available in the Middle East. So our work is mostly focused on circumventing censorship and dealing with authoritarianism as a whole, because of the fact that Middle Eastern countries, in many cases, are aligned with regional powers like Russia and China and other places. So this is kind of an intro of how the situation right now in Afghanistan is really relevant. The reason why I picked this panel, is to focus on how authoritarians actually work with each other. So I grew up in Iraq under the regime of Saddam Hussein. We only had 2 media stations controlled by the states. And to give you an anecdotal example, we didn't know that Iraq invaded Kuwait. Most of the information that used to come from us, that used to export, and the technology used to be exported from Russia and former Soviet Union, is that they control all sources of information, including the education system. So in 2005, I was watching a documentary on National Geographic showing Iraqi tanks going into Kuwait. And I was like, what? That was not the story we were told. The story we were told that Israel and the United States invaded Iraq, and we won that battle. And it's called the mother of all battles. And when I asked my dad, he was like, did you know about the truth? Like, did we actually invade Kuwait and things like that? He was like, I did, but if I told you, you would be in trouble, because most of the people around him and in the country he grew up in are all in the intelligence services. And that most of that technology and most of that belief actually came from the former Soviet Union, in which they exported most of these kind of authoritarian mindset. Is authoritarianism not just in censorship, but also create a mindset of authoritarianism in which you're all afraid of each other. And that what brings me to Afghanistan, in which they imported something similar, but within a theocratic sense. And as many of you have probably noticed, the withdrawal, I've been contacted by really hundreds of thousands of people, of most of them who used to work with the US Army, US government, and many other freedom countries. And they saw that while the authoritarians like the Taliban have the support of Qatar, has the support of multiple authoritarian groups and countries, the people who actually love freedom are left to be killed like animals in the streets. And that is the difference between authoritarians standing for each other and freedom countries leaving other freedom people to be killed like animals in the street. And that, I think, why authoritarians are winning and people for freedom are losing. Thank you.
Yeah. No, thank you. Thank you. Now, Maria Bello will speak about Venezuela.
Oh, well, hi, everyone. My name is Maria Bello. I came to the United States when I was only 17 years old due to socialism back in my country. In Venezuela, I used to do campaigns against the government because to me, if I did something to protect my country, I would be able to stay at home. At 17, I found out that I had to leave the country because something could happen to me or my family. I came to the United States all by myself, and then 8 years later, I'm still here and fighting for freedom. In 2019, I found out that people my age will vote for socialism when they don't even know what that means. They don't know what socialism is. What they tell us every time we go into a college campus and talk about our experience, they say that was not real socialism. It is going to be better this time. The reality is It doesn't matter if you put the word democratic before socialism, it is the same thing. Socialism destroyed my country. Socialism destroyed my family. Socialism destroyed everything I knew. And that is why I'm in the United States fighting for freedom. And the CEO and co-founder of a new nonprofit called America's Momentum. We will be dedicating, our goal, it is to talk about human rights violations. What happens when you live in a socialist/communist country? What happens when people my age go out in the streets and they're fighting for freedom? I don't think Americans know what freedom means. I know a lot of people talk about what is the American dream to you. So many people will say the American dream to me is to buy a house, to get a business. My American dream is freedom, and that's what America means to me, freedom. I have been going to college campuses, talking to people about my story. I have found that a lot of people will say, well, I did my research in Venezuela, and the problem with Venezuela is the US sanctions. That is their excuse. They think socialism, it's gonna come to the United States and it's gonna be so beautiful. In reality, it is gonna destroy this country. What I say is that socialists are gonna promise you free things, but they will never promise you freedom. But what do you do with no freedom? And honestly, I don't have the time to pack my bags and go to another country because I don't think there is any other country on earth we can go to. That's what America means to me, freedom. And that's why I'm here, still fighting for freedom until the day I die. Thank you.
No, thank you. Thank you. Because yes, we need to preserve freedom where we have it right now. So Lee will not right now talk about China or the censorship of China. Many people from the audience do not understand the level of repression, for instance, that people live in China. So if you want to talk about it, please go ahead.
Okay. China, a lot of people have an impression China was bad under Mao. Now it's different. It's good. It's something that we can learn from, and we can use China as a model. But what I'm going to tell you is, no, China never changed. It's still a communist country, still dictatorship, and some aspect is even worse because under Mao, at least, was a group of dictators ruled China. Right now, it's one dictator ruling China. And when I was growing up in China, 1950s, 60s, 70s, we have total, the government control our lives in every aspect of our lives. For example, you can take a bath once a week. You can get a haircut once a month. You can, if the husband and wife don't live together, you get to sleep with each other twice, 2-month period of the year. Government dictate every single aspect of your lives, from how much food you can get, meat, vegetables, matches, sugar, oil, everything, fabric, cotton, you name it. Not a thing is not government planned for you, for your lives. And then right now, it's a little bit better. Government let go of some of the controls in these aspects, but they never let go of the control of people's mind. They want the entire country, 1.4 billion people, think as one person. And that's why you hardly ever seen something invented in China. They're all made in China, including me, but they're never invented because you can't have a free mind to think. Everything you have an idea, every time you have an idea, you have to get approval first. You might end up in jail, you might end up being executed. So nobody wants to think, nobody dare to think. If they want to think, they want to be creative, they leave China. They go to other countries. So there's China, why people say Chinese people steal the technology and copy other people's products. That's the reason, because that's the only way they can survive. And right now, on the economic side, the government had lessened some controls on individual activities, but China is not a capitalist country. Not like earlier the debater, one of the debater, I would totally disagree with him. He might think China is a capitalist country, a socialist style, or with Chinese characteristics capitalism. No, China is still planned economy. And government direct investment and government dictated, directed investment. Those are all part of the planned economy. And China is still exporting this idea, this planned economy through One Belt, One Road initiative to all over the world, Africa, Central Asia, and you name it. But because this is not true capitalism, so it's not sustainable. So Chinese economy is on the verge of bankruptcy and collapse. You go to today, last year, some of my friends went to East Africa. They saw all the abandoned, half-done Chinese projects there because they could not sustain, they could not continue. So Chinese still under dictatorship, it's just little in different appearances. And in China, even worse now. You can't say anything that's not favorable to the government. Not only you say something against it, you're in trouble. If you praise them, you don't praise it incorrectly, you're in trouble. It's that bad. And they have a social credit system, they have a camera everywhere. They brainwash the Chinese people, say that's better for your safety because we can catch criminals very fast. Everything is under the camera. What about our freedom, our privacy? Nothing. And Chinese people buying into that. They say, oh, it's better for us. And there's still people have no freedom to choose the education because education is 100% controlled by the government, textbook. And some Christians have their own schools, but then you cannot go into any Chinese universities if you didn't go through the Chinese government schools. And like you said, the histories all fabricated. Nothing is true. In China, we always say that all the media is also controlled by the government. We say a Chinese newspaper, besides the date, nothing is true. Nothing is real. Only the date printed on the newspaper could be true. It's not 100%. So that's the reality. And no, China is not a model for anybody, but unfortunately today, the whole world imitate China with the lockdown, with the mandate mask. There's no proof those things work. Will prevent the pandemic, but without question, all the government was so eager to copy China. And that's very dangerous.
No, yes, let me build on China because I think it also relates to the previous two talks about Iraq and about Venezuela. In the sense that when you read what people were writing in the 1990s, when you see the public discourse, the interviews, the speeches in the 1990s, you saw optimism for liberal democracy. You saw optimism for not only markets, the Washington Consensus in Latin America, the developing of Africa, the rebuilding of Eastern Europe, at the same time for democracy, for giving people the right to vote, for giving people a voice. Today, a generation after that, a generation after all those efforts, we don't see that optimism in liberal democracy. And in contrast, we see many people advocating for this type of chronic capitalism, central planning, authoritarian, manum militari type of economic system. And they see the Chinese model as the future. And I think that's something that all of us are against, because we believe in freedom, we believe in democracy, not even for a utilitarian perspective, but from a fundamental perspective. And in fact, I don't believe that the Chinese model is sustainable in its current form. That's something that I truly believe. And if you go to the all other Asian countries, they became democracies. South Korea, Japan, they eventually became democracies. And I hope that China will one day become a democracy sooner than later. Which again comes from something that you said about ways that these authoritarian regimes exchange information. I see that in Venezuela. In Venezuela, we had a huge amount of US sanctions on the financial perspective and the energy sector specifically. And what I saw is a deep connection and interchange of ideas and information between China, Iran, Russia, Turkey, and Venezuela. And I saw that, for example, in the energy sector, in which Iran found ways to circumvent the sanctions of oil, to bring oil and gasoline through the African Horn without their transponders on in the shipments. And for example, in the financial sector, the same with, for example, Rosneft, the oil industry of Russia. And you coming from Iraq, I'm sure you also saw that. So please talk to us about this exchange of information that exists between authoritarian regimes to circumvent diplomacy.
Yeah, I mean, I sometimes get asked two questions. What keeps you awake at night and what scares you the most about your work? And actually what scares me the most about my work is if China exports its censorship tools to the Middle East. China has an amazingly advanced surveillance techniques that does not exist in many countries in the Middle East. With all the authoritarianism in the Middle East, there was always that loophole of corruption. You can always bribe your way out of something. Many of these governments, while they can be authoritarian in some way, you hear a lot of stories of defectors. And how the stories come in is that you bribe the person at the government, you are able to find your loophole, and then you escape the country. Most of the technologies that are now being exported is a surveillance technology, in which that is all mostly based on artificial intelligence, is based on tracking tools that didn't exist, that didn't apply before. So that means that many of the tools that we use, we call them freedom technologies, which are many like VPNs, which is virtual private networks, encrypted communications, etc. My biggest worry is that if that gets censored in the Middle East, it will be amazingly difficult to get them any of the ideas about freedom and human rights accessible. To give you like an anecdotal example, it's not anecdotal, from research from the United Nations Arab Development Report, they said that there were more books translated to Spanish in 1 year than Arabic in 1,000 years. This is the ratio of cultural exchange used to be between the Arab world and the outside world because of authoritarianism. And then things opened up a little bit in my country of Iraq after the US war. Iraq moved from crazy authoritarian to crazy not authoritarian. It's mainly crazy, but the only thing shifted. But there was actually much higher exposure to information after the war than before the war. And now, as more governments are pro-Iran, are moving more to controlling Iraq, they're bringing some of the technologies that they're getting from China, which means forget about the protest in the next 10 years, forget about the ability for anybody to organize and form any opposition political party. Everything will be controlled by the state. Everything, they know who you communicate to, who you talk to, etc., etc. On the psyche that they create that I just talked about, is that growing up in for example, until today in Syria, out of 4 adults, one is in the intelligence services. Think about that. They make you even afraid of your best friend. So that creates not just you are worried about communicating to your friend, you also cannot even trust your best friend. Everybody is afraid of everybody. Nobody can actually organize. And this technology of authoritarianism is only increasing in magnitude. So that is really the biggest worry of 21st century. The other advantages of some authoritarians have nowadays is that they can learn from each other. So, for example, until today, Bashar al-Assad is in power. Many people thought, oh, Ba'ath Party is going to be done. Syria is going to be turned into a liberal democracy. All failed. Part of the reason is that many of Russia, unlike America, stood by their allies. When Vladimir Putin said he's going to stand with the president of Syria, he actually fucking did it. Unlike Barack Obama, who drew a red line and never fulfilled it. He learned, Bashar al-Assad learned that if he formed alliances prior to a war, prior to invasion, with authoritarian states like Russia, like others, who don't want to see any form of liberal democracy spreading, it actually works. China and many countries have the advantage. They know how the Soviet Union fell. So they have learned from it. They know what other authoritarians are dealing with and what actually works and what actually doesn't. What do freedom countries do? They don't share any knowledge with each other. They don't support each other. And again, that's the point, is that if people don't fight for freedom, it will go away.
It's a very important point. Yes. It's a very important point, the one that you just raised, in the sense that democracies, we put red lines. And Obama did that with Al-Assad. And then they fold. Then they don't apply them. And in contrast, authoritarian regimes, they do a ton of engagement with each other. And they're together, and they exchange information. So basically, a quick question for you again, and a follow-up would be, should we do more engagement with these authoritarian regimes and seek like middle ways, and then from the inside seek long-term transitions, or should we simply apply the red lines? Should we go deeper? Should we go deeper in diplomacy? Should we go deeper in financial repression? There's a term called in economics called geoeconomics, which is the use of economic tools towards geopolitical objectives. And we try to do that, but then we are not effective. The US sanctions, for instance, they don't monitor the sanctions, the effectiveness of the sanctions, the desirability of the sanctions. And I assume that in the Middle East, it's exactly the same. So that's why then you don't see transitions to democracy the way we want to be. Because something that people need to understand is that we cannot leave these people alone. Like right now in Afghanistan, for instance, I was talking to a friend, a member of Students for Liberty. His name is Parwis. And he told me, Jorge, I have 3 sisters in Afghanistan. What can I tell him? No, we're going to do nothing. No, we have to do something, because these are 3 lives. And I hate that, for example, in the case of Venezuela, people talk about millions of refugees just as a number, as a cold number. These are families that are destroyed. These are lives that are fundamentally torn apart. Friends that I know that because, for example, they are in exile, then they know that they will never see their grandparents again, because their grandparents do not have a visa to come to the States, and they cannot leave the States. So that's why these panels are important. And I will follow up really quick with you. What should we do? More engagement, more red lines?
Yeah, so I come from Iraq, which is one of the countries where the intervention really failed, at least the military one, and which the idea was that if we're gonna kick off the dictator, then democracy is gonna spread. Here is one issue. Most people there don't even what democracy even means. You cannot drone your way out of this. So military engagement, as we have seen in Afghanistan, I am actually, unlike libertarians, I'm actually for intervention. So I am for military engagement when it's necessary. However, I think the biggest form of engagement is, number one, be also a role model for these freedom values. And America, from my experience of living here for 10 years, how many people know what freedom actually means, as she said? Most even Americans know what this country is all about. Forget about foreigners know what this country is all about. So the best thing Americans can do actually on a local level is actually to be a role model for these values. That's number one. Number two, not necessarily through diplomacy, for example, like our work is to make the knowledge about these ideas accessible to the people who are living under authoritarian regimes. Many people there do not know about these ideas of free markets and free engagement and voluntary. They have been used and lived under authoritarian regimes their entire lives. And there used to be a time during the Cold War when the United States used to export its values. There was a time in which America had a coherent ideas of what they stand for, in which they had Radio for Europe. They had a lot of radio stations and TV stations that they had to support all of the values what America does around the world. America right now has a failed channel called Voice of America that no one watches except my grandma. China has a channel called CGTN, which is now one of the most watched channels in the Middle East. They do a lot of viral videos. They create very engaging. They actually have Chinese people who speak fluent Arabic. And by doing that, their videos go viral just because they are exotic. It's like there's this person from China speaks fluent Arabic, and people just share their videos all the time. So they have been able to circumvent most of the cultural nuances. And the other example is Russia Today. Russia Today Arabic is also one of the most watched channels in the Middle East. America, Voice of America, is no one watches it, as I said, except maybe the staff who actually works in Voice of America are probably forced to watch what America stands for. That is, I think, is the best form of engagement, is America actually spreading its values. And the way for these values to actually succeed, they have to be adopted by the locals. America cannot be the one controlling the world and spreading the value. These values have to be believed by the locals, and that can only be happen if the locals there know about the existence of these values. And I think this is the best way for engagement.
That's true, and that will segue perfectly with Maria's work, because what you are doing is trying to explain and to encourage people to understand what socialism is about, and at the same time try to do it in an empathic manner, because we need to win the hearts of people. We need to explain to them why freedom is important from in the hearts of them. And I see, for example, we have different Venezuelans here. We have Esteban, Andres, many Venezuelans, and all of us share that we need to really explain, but not from an academic standpoint, from an emotional standpoint. We need to explain, again, why freedom matters. So please talk to us about how can we do that? How can we explain freedom? Which are the things that we should believe in, and how can we communicate them?
So one of the things will be, instead of telling people, okay, I read about socialism, this is what it means, people like stories. People like to hear stories from people that have actually lived through this. I mean, you might know about socialism when you go into a college campus and you talk about this is what socialism is. Where do you get that information from? From Google or from a book? But when you have people that have actually lived through that, and they can tell you, I have to do a line of 200 people to be able to get into a supermarket to buy food. And when I got close to the gate of the supermarket, there was nothing left. That happened to me, that happened to my mom, it still happened to my family. So one of the things will be educating people. You have to start educating them from the house. We have to start educating our kids and tell that at home, look, this is what I lived through. I don't want you to support that. We have to educate the next generation of Americans, because sadly, they're falling into this idea of how good socialism is, but then they have a MacBook, they buy a Starbucks, they're capitalists, but they like the idea of having everything for free. For example, free tuition. Where is that gonna come from? From our taxes. So my thing is, we have to keep educating people. We have to keep telling people our stories. Not just you, not just me, but every Venezuelan, every Cuban, every person from Nicaragua that have lived through socialism needs to step up and talk about what they went through and what their family's still going through. My family's still living through socialism. My family's still living through that hell of it's gonna work out this time. I mean, Chavez will always say it. Socialism is the best thing that will happen to Venezuela. And look at Venezuela now. Chavez would say, I'm following into what Fidel Castro said. Look at Cuba right now. They're a communist country, 60 plus years. Venezuela has been a socialist country for more than 20 years. So you have to start educating people. We have to start from home, and then we have to watch where our kids are actually seeing in school. It's not just enough where we're sending our kids to school. We have to look at the curriculum. We have to look at what people are actually telling them. I had a professor, one of my political science classes, and my professor said, okay, well, we are gonna write an essay about a country, and I chose Venezuela because, I mean, who's gonna know more than my country than myself? When he gave me my essay back, I had a 70. And I asked the professor, why do I have a 70? And he said, because what I said in that essay was not true. Venezuela was not a socialist country, and Maduro is not a dictator. So just imagine, this is happening in our school. This is happening in college. So what's going to happen next? Our kids are not going to go to school because they're telling them that socialism is good. Another of my political science classes, my professor said that capitalism will never work. And all of my assignments were about how good socialism is, why socialism works, why socialism is good. And I dropped out. I'm not going to take a class where I know I'm going to have a 0 because I'm not going to fall into that. So my thing is, Americans don't want the same people that destroy my country to destroy this country. Because where are you guys gonna go? Like all Venezuelans that we immigrated to this country, where are we gonna go? Are we gonna have America falling into socialism again? Are we gonna, history is repeating. We cannot let that happen.
That's true. And related to that, for example, Lee, what should we do with China? And what is the future of China? And what can we do? Because when you go to Washington and you talk to the foreign service community, and you ask them, okay, what are the threats or the challenges that we have in this world? Everyone's talking about China. Everyone is talking about this competition, this economic competition, military competition, and competition about geopolitical supremacy, in the sense that what happened with Hong Kong, for instance, there was no pushback from the Western world. We have the situation in Taiwan, for instance. There are people that are resisting, and I can imagine they're afraid right now, given the lack of support that they could see. So what can the West do with China? There are some people who talk about isolation of China. There are people who talk about tariff. There are people who talk about trade wars. And there are others who simply say, okay, we need to do more diplomacy. But what should the Western world do about China? And that's a normative question. And the positive question would be, where is China going?
I think I want to first comment about one thing. When Taliban took over Kabul and the whole Afghanistan, the Chinese people were celebrating. They said it was liberation, and they referred it to 1949, 48, when the Chinese army took over Shanghai and Beijing. And guess what? Before Taliban took over entire Afghanistan, on August 1st, the entire Taliban team went to Beijing, had a great meeting with the leaders in China, and got all kinds of support and directions, ideas to how to do it. Then they went back to Afghanistan, and very soon they took over the whole country. And then my Chinese friend was telling me, say, why are you helping Afghanis to leave? Because the Taliban want to keep people in because they want to keep the smart people and educated people to help rebuild the new country. I said, wow, sounds so familiar, because 1950s, the Chinese Communist government said the same thing. And people, including my grandparents, my parents, stayed. Some even returned from other country back to China. In 2 years of the time, where did they all end up? In the concentration camp. The best, the smartest, the highly educated, most of them end up in the west of China. The environment is so harsh. They were locked down there and to survive on their own. And most people died within 2 years of time. They end up eating each other's waste. They will, at night, they will go to dig up the dead body secretly and eat them. That's reality. Until today, that area is still forbidden for visitors. And because it was so horrible. And the Chinese people today even believed what Taliban said. That's the success of the Chinese government-controlled education system, because history was not told. Young people didn't know what happened. When I go there to talk about it, they all get mad at me. I said I was just telling my own story. And that's why when Hong Kong people start demonstration and very little support from mainland China, never mind the international support, in Hong Kong, that's the first time in history with the the movement, people's movement is so spontaneous. No leaders, no central planning. There's no leaders. Everybody, 20 million people, they go to work, and at lunchtime, they take off their suit and tie and put on t-shirt and went onto the street. Just like that. And thankful to Telegram, somebody will say, oh, I have an idea. We should do this. We should have this slogan, and post it on the Telegram. In few minutes, tens of thousands of people will say, okay, let's do it. Just like that. But internationally, very, very little support, because people, big companies, businesses, they all had their stake in Hong Kong. They don't want to lose that. And Chinese government really watch all these businesses and threaten them. For example, all the fashion brands, on their website, they will say, we have stores in Taiwan, Hong Kong, and China, Shanghai and Beijing. Immediately, Chinese government said, no, you have to say China, Hong Kong, China, Taiwan, China, Shanghai, China, Beijing. All the fashion brands changed, including World Bank, because they're so afraid of the communist government. Of course, they're not supporting the Hong Kong people, but Hong Kong people is not going to give up. Right now, it looks like died down, but no. Hong Kong people, they're not Chinese, because they grown up in a free society. They know what freedom is. Just like you said, they know what freedom is. And now they lost it. They won't not like that happen. And also, Hong Kong have their own educational system. They have their freedom of choice textbooks, curriculums. So they're not brainwashed by the government, even though 1989 Tiananmen massacre happened 32 years ago. The Hong Kong people memorializing that for 32 years nonstop. So every Hong Kong students knew about it, knew about the horror of communism. They know not to trust the communist government. So even though they're quiet, they're not dead. So we really do need international support for the people in Hong Kong and Taiwan fighting to gain back their freedom or protect the freedom they already have right now.
Actually, I have a modern example about Afghanistan. Like, there's new generation of girls, for the first time they went to school, unlike their mothers. So most of the young girls, like who are 20 or 15, etc., many of them are protesting in Afghanistan right now, is that they want to go back to school, unlike their mothers who lived their whole lives without going to school. So they knew what the freedom looks like. They knew the fact that them as women can get educated. Therefore, like one of the articles which on foreign policy, I believe, is that they say that Taliban is ruling over a different country. Like the country that they ruled before were mostly uneducated, illiterate. Most of them don't know what freedom looks like. But many of the 20 years later, the newer generation, most of them are familiar with, oh, girls have to go to school, equality is important, etc. So they're ruling over a different generation. And that's really the power of exposure. And unfortunately, America wasted $2 trillion on this country, and they withdraw, and most of the work has gone.
Yes. When I was talking, for example, with this Students for Liberty member in Afghanistan, he told me, Jorge, people in Kabul are not the same that 1996. This is different. And now that, for example, we only have a couple of minutes left, I think I will try to draw some conclusions and some things that we need to talk about these presentations that we have. Like, the first thing is that we need to re-understand the geopolitical institutions that we have, the international community. We need to re-understand how can we will, I will say it, export democracy, how we need to do it. We need to re-understand the world as it is. Because the institutions that we have right now, when they were created, when you look at a map in the 1950s, the first thing you look was the Atlantic, was Western Europe, was the New England area of the US. Now you need to look at the Pacific. Now you need to look at Silicon Valley, Taiwan, China, Japan, and the institutions that we're creating now need to show that. Because as long as our democratic efforts do not have a reach in that part of the world, which is the most vibrant economically, in that sense at least, then we will not be successful.
Yeah, but I don't think democracy is the most important thing, because 4 years ago when I was in Afghanistan, I went there two times. They had a democracy 4 years ago. They have a freedom of speech because I watched somebody on TV criticizing the government, and I was surprised. But when I talked to their economic advisors, to their president, and they say, we like Chinese model. We don't like United States model. I say, why is that? Because Chinese model government have control of the economy, have control of the people. That's their objective. And I was horrified. But now Taliban is a different story. Even then, when they had a democracy, they had the freedom of speech. The government, they love power. They love control. So they love Chinese style.
Yes, exactly. But we need to aim for democracy and freedom. And that's what I believe, and that's what I think we need to push. So, and the second, again, we are out of time. So the second really quick conclusion is that we need to work with people like Maria, for instance, in the sense that narratives matter, ideas matter, the ideas that people have in their heads about whether the economy is fair or not, whether democracy is fair or not, whether we have an inclusive economy, whether we have opportunities for everyone. And I think that's not technical issues. Those are narratives. Those are political questions that we need people like Maria on college campuses fighting for that. So that way, this country is free, which will guarantee that sooner or later, countries like mine will be free. So thank you very much.